Ready. Okay. We're holding top of page or towards the top of page, Sadik Beis Amid Beis. About 7 lines from the top. So we're trying to figure out the sugya before is talking about the people that says tzaddikim are going to be resurrected before the beginning of the days of Mashiach, and then there's going to be a period of like 1,000 years where people pass away again, and the tzaddikim will live in that period of time, and then after that is going to be again a second resurrection of the dead, which we're going to learn about what type of resurrection that is in the Mefarshim. So he says, the Gemara says, B'neilif mimeisim shehechi Yechezkel. Now, that's what Rashi learns. The other Mefarshim learned that the question over here is that we should learn from the people that in Bavel. There's a story that Hashem tells Yechezkel to resurrect. We'll see who those people were. Resurrect the people that had died. And so Yechezkel does a Tchias HaMesim. What happens to them afterwards, we'll see. So we should see from there. So Rashi says we should see from there that there'll be people that die and become alive again within the days of Mashiach themselves. The other Mefarshim learned that the question is that why isn't this a makar? That there's the concept of Tchias HaMesim Bechlal. The main Gemara is dealing with the question from the beginning of Chelek is the proof of Minat Torah that there's the concept of Tchias HaMesim. The very fact that we see over here that Yechezkel brought these people back to life is a proof that there's a concept of Tchias HaMesim. But Rashi says like this. Rashi says Shechazru Meisu. Hey Aaron. So the Rashi learns like this. What's the story of Yechezkel? Shechazru Meisu. There are people who died again. Kach, so what do we see? That they were resurrected and then they died again. Kach tzaddikim, so too tzaddikim, the righteous, sha'asid lahachyos, that they're going to be resurrected in the early days. They're going to experience the initial stages of the resurrection of the days of Mashiach. Is yachzru la'afram, they're going to again go back to death, and only afterwards they'll be resurrected a second time. Kach shamaiti. So I hear that's pshat. That means to say it's the pshat is about those who get resurrected in the early days of Mashiach will again themselves die and then come back to life. But the other Mefarshim learned the question that you could say simply the question in the Gemara is that who was it who says the Marsha says that he doesn't argue with Rashi. He says Shalulei Pirush near Leimer. If Rashi wouldn't have said that to say that it's talking about the specific past piece of Gemara about the tzaddikim who are resurrected in the first days of Mashiach go back pass away again. I mean to say the point is it's a fundamental point. Are we learning from here that there's the concept of resurrection of the dead, or are we learning from here that those who are resurrected will die again? Two opposite points. So Rasha says, "Shaluli Perusha near Lemer." If not for Rashi, I would have said, all the entire past 5 pages that we learned that they're trying to find proof from Midaraisa, from biblical sources that there's a concept of the resurrection of the dead. Comes the Gemara and says, why can we just learn it from the fact that there was a resurrection of the dead in the story of Yechezkel? So, according against those voices who say there cannot be, this is the Marsha saying there cannot be resurrection dead. We could have just brought a proof against those who disagree, who do not believe in Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, from the story of Yechezkel. But either way, how you're going to learn it, Rashi definitely does not learn that. Rashi learns it's coming about that those who are going to experience the early days of Mashiach are going to die. The focus is not on the living, that they were resurrected, but that they died afterwards. So Rashi says, Kach Shemaiti, so I heard. Meaning to say, he understands that it's not simple pshat, but Kach Shemaiti. Now Rashi just continues. It's interesting, Rashi. Rashi says, Yechezkel, he got Nebuchadnezzar. Rashi is telling us basic history, which is, you wonder why would Rashi need to tell us that. Who is Yechezkel? Rashi says he was exiled by Nebuchadnezzar when Im Yechanya Melch Yehuda. The first exile means there was 2 exiles by King Nebuchadnezzar, right? First he exiled the King Yechanya, and the aristocrats and what's called in Yiddish the Besser mentioned from Yehuda were taken to Galus in Bavel. He appointed eventually Tzidkiyahu to be king after a few other kings. So first king is Yechanya Melch Yehuda. So Yechezkel goes with him to Bavel. Yechezkel misnave beBavel, and Yechezkel is prophesying in Babylonia, Yirmiyahu Eretz Yisrael. Simultaneously, they lived the same times. You want to know who is Yechezkel? In case Rashi is giving us basic history, Yechezkel was in the first Golus, and he's at the same time as Yirmiyahu. While Yirmiyahu is prophesying in Eretz Yisrael, Yechezkel is prophesying in Babel. And what are we talking about? We're talking about primarily, because there was only a few months of a king in between, we're talking about primarily the 12 years Shemalach Tzidkiyahu, that Tzidkiyahu was king. So the last king, the final king of Judah is Tzidkiyahu, and those final 12 years, Yirmiyahu was the prophet in Eretz Yisrael. Yirmiyahu was old; he was very prophesying by their father, by Yeshayahu, and Yechezkel was prophesying in Bava. Okay, so back to the Gemara. So either way, let's use this story of Yechezkel as a proof. So why don't we use this as a proof? Whether we're asking according to the Pashup shot like the Marsha understands, or according to Rashi that there's a proof that they die after they get resurrected. It's Savrila because the Gemara seems like the Gemara holds Commander Omar be'emes mashal haya, that it wasn't a true story, that it was just meaning that it wasn't a story that happened, that there was actually people that the Yechezkel brought back to life. It is a mashal, it's an example that of the concept, like Rashi says, be'emes be'bar, simply we have to say mashal haya shahaya miramizlem. What was this? What was it a hint? It was a hint on the exile. Ka'adam meis, that an exile is like a person who dies, and then eventually comes back to life. Kach Yisrael Yeshavim in a Galutz. It was a sign that the Jewish people will, hopefully, after 70 years, and then after the final Galutz, will go back out of the Galutz. It means Galutz is not a final thing. It's going just like Yechezkel was able to resurrect the dead. In a concept that he says the marshal, so too the Jewish people will be brought back, so to say, to life and back to Eretz Yisrael. The Tanya, how do we know that it's such opinion that Yechezkel, it wasn't a true story, that Yechezkel didn't actually resurrect the dead? The Tanya we learned, Rabbi Lezraimer, Meisim Shehechi Yechezkel Amdal Ragleim, that the dead, who again we don't know who they are yet, we'll learn who they are in a second, but the dead who Yechezkel resurrected stood up on their feet. From here we have a raya that when a person wants to say Shira to Hashem, you have to stand. Amdal Ragleim for Amru Shira, and they said Shira. Well, Meisu, and then after they said Shira, they died. So that's what Rebbe Lezer says. If you look, we're going to see actually the different psukim that we quote of what shira they said. First of all, I guess that's a mocker. That's a mocker of that why we stand when we hear the shira. You see clearly Amdal Argoy, and they stood up because they were lying there. You'll see in a piece of Gemara, they weren't even full bones. they were bones that were made into vessels that they became alive as Nebuchadnezzar was drinking from it. So here we say that they became alive. They stood up on their feet and they said Shira. Umeisu ma Shira amru. So the question is, of course, the Gemara wants to know what did they say? What praise did they say? So they said like this: Hashem meimus b'tzedek. So you have to pay attention to what they're saying. That God gives death justly, meaning it was his right sometimes to punish with death. He's right whenever he punishes with death. God is always right. And then he gives life with compassion. So what was the pasuk? So I'm just going to quote the Marsha. Now, God, that we try to do more mefarshim to understand better. We could just read the Gemara like Ashru if we like, but we'll go a little slower so we can understand the Gemara itself. So the Marsha says, why did he say this pasuk that God gives death justly and then he resurrects with compassion? Justice is din. Rachmim is a different midah. It's a different midah, right? Before Yom Kippur, we're trying to awaken God's compassion. Compassion is even if a person is not worthy. So the Marsha says, the Hainu Laman Damra, this is according to the opinion. This all depends on who are these dead. So according to Rabbi Lezer, who said that he said Shira, and they asked what did they say, and the Gemara says they said Hashem Meimus b'tzedek machai b'rachmim. So Rabbi Marsha says here we're talking about the people shekafru b'tchis hamesim. They didn't agree. They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. And they don't feel that they're worthy to be resurrected in the days of Mashiach. Like we learned in our Mishnah, that people that don't believe in the resurrection of the dead are not worthy to be resurrected. Therefore, Yechezkel resurrected them now, meaning at the time when he did, towards the end of the first base of Mikdash, according to Rashi, he says he was Misnava. He prophesied in the last 12 years of Tzidkiyahu to show them that he could, that God could resurrect the dead. So they were saying that God can't resurrect the dead and they're not worthy. So Yechezkel showed that there can be resurrection dead. What do they believe? It means they weren't arguing with the God's ability to resurrect the dead. They argue with the gods of the worthiness of the people so that they should be resurrected dead. They said, why does a person die? That person dies because of sin. If a person dies because of sin, so they're not worthy for resurrection dead. That's what he says. There's no reason for this person to be resurrected again. Therefore they said, that you're right. Hashem kills people right justly. If a person dies, it's just. That's Hashem's punishment. However, but it's not about the schus. The resurrection doesn't come with tzedek, that the person's worthy. You're right, the person's not worthy. But the Chaim Mason comes with rachum, with compassion. And therefore, they recognize that, and that was the praise that they said to Hashem, that even if a person dies, or let's say negativity happens, the person justifully doesn't mean that they're not going to get a Yeshua, a salvation, they're not going to get resurrection because of compassion. That's the power of Rachmim. So their issue was with the power of Rachmim, and they recognized when they themselves were resurrected that there was the concept of Rachmim. So that's Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Shua says, Shira Zu Oimru. He says a different pasuk because we're talking about different issues here. Not that they're just quoting the argument what pasuk they said. He said, Hashem meimusumachai, God gives death and gives life. Moir Cha'ol V'yal, and he brings person down into the abyss, meaning to be buried again. V'yal, and rises up. So according to this, the fish, why did they say that praise? The fish Zelufi Ashita, that's according to the opinion the Marsha says. Shemesu Koidim Zmanim Mipnei Chetam. They died not because they were disagreeing with the resurrection of the dead. They died early, before their time, for the excessive sin that they've done. Why did God bring them back to life? And then they married women, like we're going to see. And then they died like everyone else, meaning that let's say they were meant to live. Everyone's meant to live, let's say 120 years, and they died young because of their sins. God resurrected them. They went on to get married and to have kids, and then they died again in their old age, like regular people. What do you mean God gives death? Someone who dies early because of their sins. And then they die again because they died like regular people. And then they will stand up again in the resurrection of the dead. So there are two types of people with two types of issues. And they were people that were sinned, and therefore they recognize and acknowledge, and we're thankful to Hashem for giving them life again. At the same time, they recognize that they will die again, and then there is going to be the final resurrection of the dead with the coming of Mashiach. The Rabbi Yehuda says, Emes Mashal Haya. This is the reason we're quoting this whole price is to show that there is an opinion that holds that the whole story never happened. It's just a mashal, it's just an example. So the Amalei Reb Nechemia tells to Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's just a mashal, im emes lama mashal, vi mashal lama emes. It doesn't make sense what you're saying. Your grammar is bad. It says it's truth and it's an example. He says if it's truth, then it's not an example. It means it's truth, it means it happened. If it's an example, then it's not truth. It's a concept. So he answers that you have to add the word ela be'emes mashal. Not saying emes mashal, but in truth, it was just an example. Okay. He says like this. Now the Gemara wants to know who these people were. So the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Glili Aimer. So Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Glili, said like this. Meisim shehechi Yechezkel. What happened to them? So we're not yet getting to who they are, but what happened to them? So we're not clear. Some people, according to the first opinion, Rabbi Lezer, it seems like they were resurrected. They said Shira, and they died right away, just to show that there's a concept of Tchis HaMesim. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, they died young and then they went off to get married and live a normal life. So it says, Meisim Shehechi Yechezkel Allah Yisrael. They went back there to Israel. Seemingly, people were still going back there to Israel even after the exile, unless we're talking about after, maybe in the time of when some sort of people were going back, like when Zerubbabel went back at some point before the story of Purim. But Nasu Nashim, They married women, and they had children, and then they lived a regular life. So after that statement, he says like this. Rabbi Yehuda Mseir al Raglov. Rabbi Yehuda Mseir stood up on his feet, famous Tana, and he said, Ani mibnei bneim. You want to know? I'll give you proof that what Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yechezkel, is saying is truth, that they went back and they had children. I am a descendant of them. And here he showed them, this is the tefillin that my grandfather gave me from I'm a descendant of. You have to remember, Yehuda Meseira lived. I think Rabbi Yehuda Meseira lived really at the end of the second, if I'm not mistaken, the end of the second base of English. But either way, it's clearly 400 years after that story happened, 400 something years. So he wasn't a direct son or grandson. It was a long time, but he said he was a descendant from them, and these are the tefillin. He still had the tefillin that were from his grandparents, that were the ones that were resurrected from the dead from Yechezkel. Okay, so he says these are the tefillin that they had. Rashi again. For some reason, Rashi's telling us a few obvious things. I'm not sure. I'm missing a bit what Rashi's coming to warn that maybe someone would not understand. Either way, he says these are the tefillin. Rashi says these were their tefillin. I'm not sure. Maybe he thought people would think that these were the tefillin were resurrected with him. I'm not sure. Either way, who were these people? Meisim Yechezkel. Who were the people that Yechezkel brought back to life? So Amrav, where are we holding? Rav says, Elu b'nei Ephraim shemanu l'kates v'to. We know there's a famous story that there is. It's interesting enough. It seems from this Gemara, it's not. We'll see the Rashi in a second. That's going to tell us more details. But it seems this Gemara that even Menashe and Ephraim, that were according to some opinions, even Menashe and Ephraim that were actually in the house of Yosef, they were royalty. They were princes. It says about Ephraim. Okay, Ephraim learned with Yaakov. Menashe was his father's front man. That's Rashi says clearly. Whenever Yosef was negotiating, Menashe was there. They themselves experienced the gullus. They lived to see the gullus. So it says, Omarav, Elu b'nei Ephraim, these are the descendants of Ephraim, from the tribe of Ephraim. Shemanu l'kates, they made a calculation of when the 400 years are up, right? That's always the problem with the kates. The problem with the kates is we have a lot of tzaddikim who've given kates hayamim, and in the time of Bavel and in the time of even Mitzrayim, there was those who miscalculated the kates. When Hashem says, when they have a tradition, 400 years, there's always the question, how do you start counting? And the same thing happened in Bavel. That's why it says that Achashverosh brought out the kelim, brought out the vessels from the Beis Hamikdash in the story of Purim, by the big meal, by the big feast, because they also miscalculated. Achashverosh knew of the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, and they miscalculated when do we start counting the Galus. Yechania was taken, we just said 12 years before Tzidkiyahu. So maybe that's the beginning of the Galus. So here Rashi is going to say this. First, they counted the date of when the 400 years were over, and when it didn't come, they got agitated. V'to Shem of Bnei Ephraim in Divrei Yom it says the sons of Ephraim Shuselach ubered b'nai v'tachas b'nai ve'el ada b'nai v'tachas b'nai zeved b'nai v'shuselach b'nai v'azer or v'elazer v'elad v'hargum anshe Gat, and they were killed by the people of Gat hanoldim ba'aretz that were born in the land. And it's so we'll see Rashi in a second what happened. So they were killed by the people of Gat. Gat traditionally is by what's today known as the strip of Gaza, by the Philistines. The pasuk clearly says that Ephraim, their father, mourned for them, for the Bnei Ephraim that tried to get out of Egypt early. They made it out of Egypt. What's interesting they were very strong. They made it out of Egypt, although we say the tradition is no one was able to leave Egypt, and they only miscalculated on 25 years, which means to say the Galus was in full force by then. So Ephraim mourns his a big part of the tribe that were killed. And his brothers come to console him. Now, seemingly, we have to understand who's his brothers. We only know he has one brother, Menashe. Therefore, a lot of people say we're not talking about Ephraim, we're talking about the sons of Ephraim. But let's see the Rashi a second. But Ta'u, that Shemanu Kates, what did they do? The Rashi says they try to calculate the deadline. the Shalitis Mitzrayim of when the Jewish people were told have a tradition that Avram was told by Hashem, it's 400 years, so when they should have to leave Mitzrayim. And they made a mistake. Why? The Rashi explains, they were only supposed to start calculating the 400 years, not from the vision that Avram had in the Bris Ben Absarim, which would make sense, right? Avram was told that you can have children. 400 years, you could and for 400 years they're going to be in Galus. So they figured, they knew right away it wasn't 400 years of Mitzrayim. No one ever thought it would be 400 years of Mitzrayim. The Jewish people were only 200 and Redu, only 210 years of Mitzrayim itself. So they knew they knew clearly it wasn't 400 years of Mitzrayim. But they thought we were supposed to count from when Avram had the vision of the message of Galus, which is when he had the Bris Ben Absarim. So Rashi says that they counted too early. They should have. What's that? They should have counted Mishanoilad Yitzchak when Yitzchak was born. The Chsiv, it says about the Bris Ben Absarim, Kiger years Arecha, that it says part of it says your children are going to be foreigners in a land. So that was part of it. They had to start with being foreigners. Who is the foreigner? Zay Yitzchak, and that's Yitzchak. It means we don't count Yishmael as the beginning. We count Yitzchak. So whenever when Hashem is talking to Avram about what's going to happen to his children, if he talks privately about Yishmael, that's a private message about the son he has from Hagar called Yishmael. But your descendants, that's talking about Yitzchak. Manu. And the Bnei Ephraim counted Mishas Hadibur Avram, when God spoke to Avram. Now, when did he speak to Avram? What's very interesting is that if anyone opens the Chumash, Avram Avinu, we meet Avram Avinu at 75, right? If I'm not mistaken. Lech Lecha starts. God tells Avram to leave his father's home. So when does he say it? The pasuk says, Hashem tells Avram, Lech Lecha mi'artzecha. I'm going to make you Vayikach Avram, and he takes Avram. Vayikach Avram, and Avram listens to God. This is the fourth verse in Lech Lecha. Avram ben Chamesh Shanim v'Shivim Shana. So we get to know seemingly Avram in his first conversation that is recorded in the Torah from Hashem that we know is when Avram Avinu is 75. That's the beginning of Lech Lecha. And then he goes to Eretz Yisrael from Ur Kasdim, right? So here he says differently. That's a different calculation. So they counted when Hashem spoke to Avram. Now, when do we learn in the Torah about the Bris Ben Absarim? Only later in Lech Lecha. Seemingly when Avram Avinu was already in Eretz Yisrael. But that's not the case. V'tanya b'seder olam. We learned in Seder Olam, Rashi says, which is the calculation of the happenings that happen in the world, that Avram Avinu b'shas shenidabri imay ben Absarim ben shivim shan hayim. The story of the Bris Ben Absarim, although it's told in the Torah later, happened when Avram was 70. So it means before he came to Eretz Yisrael 5 years, before he got the commandment of Lech Lecha 5 years. So he's already talking to God about what's going to happen in the Bris Ben Absarim happens when he's in Ur Kasdim, Shivim Shana, which he was 70 years old. And after the Bris Ben Absarim, when he was told about the exile, Yitzchak's only born when Avram was 100, 30 years later. Clearly it says Avram is 100 years old and Yitzchak is born. Now, the only thing that's not clear in the Torah, which is Seder Olam, is when the Bris Ben Absarim happened. But it definitely happened before. But then the Bris Ben Rashi quotes the Bris Ben Absarim happened 30 years before. So if you're counting 30 years before Yitzchak is born, so you're off on your calculation of 400 years by 30 years. It was also not that many. Achashverosh was off by quite a few years. Avram ben Meah shana b'hayid lois Yitzchak m'noi nimtza. Omer mishdabri imay ben Absarim achi yatzim Mitzrayim hayu arba me'as v'oisin lamed shanim v'oisin lamed shminadibra ad leidas Yitzchak tov ben Ephraim. And that was the mistake that Ephraim made. The children of Ephraim made that they counted the 400 years when Avram was 70. So when it came 400 years and they were still in Gullus, they said, "What's going on? We got to go out. It's time to leave." Hashem told Avram 400 years. It's 400 years. It's time to leave. And how do we know that the Bnei Ephraim are the ones that left early? because the pasuk says that they were killed by the Anshikas. Okay, so we don't know. So seemingly, stopping right here in this story is that Ephraim himself mourns his son, and he's eulogized. He's consoled by his brothers. It says Echav, not Achiv, Echav. So understanding the Mefarshim say, just to bring down a few Mefarshim, it says that the question is, I think the Mashal, I forget who says, the question is that there's some opinions. Yeah, I looked in Malachim, that's right. So the Mefarshim Malachim say, I'm sorry, on Divrei Yom say, there's a question if that's Ephraim himself. It means that Ephraim lived to experience the Gullus, and we know that for sure that none of the brothers lived. That Levi was the last to die of the brothers of the tribes. So up until Levi died, there wasn't the Gullus. But it seems a little interesting that Ephraim and Menashe, which were they were from the younger son Yosef, and they were born when he was already a little older. He was after he was in prison. So, but nevertheless, that it seems very odd that Ephraim should have experienced the Gullus and he should have lived that long. Either way, most Mefarshim say it's not Ephraim himself; it's just the tribe of Ephraim mourned. But there are some Mefarshim say it was the Ephraim himself. Some try to use the pasuk Echav brothers, that we don't know that Menashe had any. He also had two sons, and other Mefarshim disagree with that. I think the Malbim and the Malbim says it wasn't Ephraim. But I think the Radak says that it was Ephraim, and he says that that the very fact that when Yaakov speaks to Yosef, and he tells him that only Ephraim and Menashe are going to be tribes, but any children born after that will have to go either to Ephraim or Menashe and join those tribes. We see clearly that there could have been other brothers that Ephraim had, and those other brothers joined Menashe, or they themselves came to console Ephraim after the death of the part of his tribe. Yes, Aaron.
Does it make a difference in the story?
Yeah, it does make a difference. You have to know Torah. You have to know all the details. There's all
but you said there's two opinions.
I know. Does it make a difference at the end? You have to know all the Torahs. You have to know all the Shitas, all the opinions. There's not a halachic question over here. If you're asking if there's a halachic difference, I don't think so. There's no halachic difference of how you should behave, because it's based on a story of what happened, but there's opinion of what the story was, if Ephraim himself was alive or not. Okay, so he says like this. Back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, so the opinion is and those are the people that died early, and those are the people that were resurrected by Yechezkel. The question obviously would have to be is just technically, where did he find them? Because if Yechezkel is in Bavel, and these people died in Gat, that's all the way. Even in today's map, it's far. Today's day, it's especially far. It's North Africa, or beginning of Aza, Gat, of the Pelishtim, versus where Yechezkel was by Nahar Tavor, which is Bavel, by Macedonia. So it's kind of far, unless the bones made their way over there. Okay, so that's one opinion. Shmuel says a different opinion. These are people that lived in the time of Yechezkel, and they didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and therefore they died, and those people were resurrected. Like Rashi says, Meisim shehechi Yechezkel, the dead that Yechezkel resurrected, Elu b'nei Adam shekafru b'chis meisim shenemer avdu tikvaseinu. So Rashi quotes this interesting thing. Rashi quotes, it's a very deep idea, that when a person's life is difficult, right? There were difficult times. It was the people were exiled from their land. They were living in Bavel. Bavel was not the hardest of our exiles by a long shot. It says that the Jewish people at the time were no way ready to face an exile like we faced in Rome, under severe circumstances like we had over the years in Christian Europe, etc., and in certain Muslim countries. But they say that the first generation, the first base of English, would never survive such a gullus like we have now. But nevertheless, it was gullus, and a Jew doesn't belong in gullus. And they said of the tikvaseinu, our hope is lost. And by saying of the tikvaseinu, they say that our life is all about the reality now, and now there's nothing left. And that's basically, they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. How do you believe in the resurrection of the dead? You see, there's a bigger picture. So that's what it says, that they're kafru, that they didn't believe in tchis mesim. How do we know? Because they said of the tikvaseinu. So he says, and then those people, so I mean, that's why, according to Shmuel, it makes a little more sense geographically, They were people that were with Yechezkel. They said of the Tikvaseinu because they were in exile with Yechezkel. They lost hope. It doesn't say if they committed suicide or not, but it seems like they died definitely before their times. And he resurrects them to show that it's not of the Tikvaseinu. So he says, how do we know? It says that God says to Yechezkel, Ben Adam, son of man, these are the Jewish, these bones represent the Jewish people. They said that our bones have dried up. When we have no hope, and it's been decreed, our destiny is sealed. That's it. It's too late. Nothing could happen. Nothing could change. So therefore, they died, and therefore Hashem wanted Yechezkel to show that it's not of the Tikvaseinu. Let's learn Rashi. Rashi says, "Atzamas ha'elu kol beis Yisrael hema." Atzamas ha'elu siman l'chol Yisrael. This is a sign for the Jewish people. Shasidim lehem tchias hamesim. They're going to have the resurrection of the dead, just like these people that died in Yechezkel's time had resurrection of the dead. Elu Omru of the Tikvaseinu, Rashi said, these people said that our hope is lost. Now they know Shani Mechayes Amesim, that I resurrected dead. There's no such thing as we lose our hope, and our fate has been sealed. So he says, and this is a sign for all Jews to know that there's going to be a resurrection of the dead. And you should know that it wasn't that they were worthy to be resurrected. Rashi says that the mission clearly says that someone who doesn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and the very fact that he fell so deep into despair that he said, there's no hope for us, without acknowledging that there's a bigger picture, there's another world, there's another time. So therefore, they shouldn't be worthy for the portion of the word to come. But as if to give them, the Jewish people knew. We know that Bechlal, in Galus, the Rebbe tells a story. The Rebbe explains us that why did Yaakov Avinu bring the trees from Eretz Yisrael. Rashi keeps on saying it over and over again. When we leave Mitzrayim and we build a Mishkan, and we had Atzei Shittim. So Rashi keeps on saying, "Menayim them Atzei Shittim." Where do they have Atzei Shittim? Why do it means they had to have everything available to make the Mishkan. The Ebenezer says that there was a traveling market with the Jews, right? If Jews are in town, there's obviously people buying things, right? So the Ebenezer said that the nations set up markets, so they had different things to buy. But according to Rashi's Shita was that they had to have everything available. So he says, "Minayin hoylhem," where they have the Atzei Shittim. So Rashi says that Yaakov Avinu planted the Atzei Shittim, brought them from Eretz Yisrael, because it's not an Egyptian tree. Brought it down to Mitzrayim, planted in Mitzrayim, and told the Jewish people, you should take these trees out with you, because there's going to be one day that you're going to leave, and you're going to build a Beis Hamikdash, and a Mishkan, you're going to need these Atzei Shittim. And the Rebbe says, why did Yaakov Avinu have to do that? Why did he have to make such a tircha? And the idea is not because he wanted them to have the trees. He wanted them to see the trees. And when a Jew goes through Galus and is feeling lost and says, "Of the tikvaseinu, there's no hope," and they see the trees and say, "What are these trees doing here? They're not Egyptian trees, because we're going to leave Mitzrayim. There's going to be a day after this, and we're going to build a Mishkan, and we're going to need the trees." They gave them chayis, they gave them energy to go on in the Galus. So too over here, in the time of Yechezkel, they weren't worthy to be resurrected in the dead. They didn't believe in Tchias HaMesim. But because they were a simon, they were a sign that there's going to be, that we don't say of the tikvaseinu, there's going to be resurrection for everyone. There's hope for everyone. Therefore, even though they themselves didn't believe in Tchias HaMesim, Yechezkel brings them back to life. Let's go a little further. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Omer. Rabbi Yirmiyah, the son of Abba, says like this: who are the people that Yechezkel resurrected? Elu b'nei Adam she'ein behem lachluchias shemitzvah. They don't even have any kind of lachluchis. Is really a word that's used in Yiddish. Lachluchis means moisture. They have no moisture, no life of a mitzvah, not even a flavor of a mitzvah, because it says hatzama seivoshes shema davar Hashem. It says these dry bones, mamish, they're dry. They have no lachluchis. Is like it says shema hatzama seivoshes shema davar Hashem. They should listen to the word of God. And so Rashi quotes the Ben Yehoidia says that shafil machshava teiva einay veris ben bekrai. What does it mean that they don't have no lachluchis of a mitzvah? They have no even moisture of a mitzvah. How do you define that? So the Ben Yehoidia says that they didn't even have one thought of a mitzvah cross their mind. So that's an extreme level of disconnect. And it says, and it wasn't said, so he continues, they weren't people that didn't believe in Tchisa Mason. This is already the Marsha saying. And the opposite, because they had no lachluchis of a mitzvah, they didn't even have any moisture of a mitzvah, they thought they're not worthy of resurrection of the dead. The kach kivan she'ein behem lachluchis mitzvah, chein chayu l'simulam she'af hem yichil asid, she'acher shi'ir nidanim v'gehenim. So the Marsha says that specifically, God told hey Ariel, God told Yechezkel to resurrect these people that didn't even have any kind of moisture of a mitzvah, and they didn't believe again that they were worthy of Tchisa Mason. They sinned. Nevertheless, the Masha says that they had that Hashem wanted to show that everyone is going to call Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek Le'olam Haba. Everyone has a portion in the world to come, and even if you sinned, you go to Gehenna, you go to hell, and then you're worthy to be resurrected at the time of the Mashiach. Okay, let's continue a little further. So it says, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Elu b'nei Adam shechifu es ha'hechel kulei shkatzim ramashim. It says these are people that what do they call it today? When people spray paint, they defiled the Mishkan, the Hechel, with different graffiti of shkatzim ramashim, non-kosher insects and rodents and all kind of stuff. Shenemar, so basically they were disrespectful people. It says that Rashi quotes. It says that Shahayu mitzayerim tzlamim al kiris hechel, like people do graffiti. So they put graffiti on the walls of the hechel, the base of Mikdash. Thechsiv ha'aba ve'era mechoike ala kir saviv. And he quotes a pasuk because it says that Shenemar va'avei ve'era. Come and I see v'ine kol tavnis remesh. That he sees all these shkatzim are like all kind of non-kosher insects and beings that were put on around and around the wall of the base of Mikdash. It doesn't say if they did this before the destruction or after the destruction. It doesn't say when they did this graffiti. I mean, seemingly the base of Mikdash was destroyed down to the ground. Could it be we're even talking about people that did this in the times of when the temple was standing? It doesn't say clearly when they did it, as far as I know. Maybe in the Mepharshim in the Torah it says. Saviv. So it says that Vavirenu Aleim Saviv, Rashi says, claim al Eisim Anashim, on these people, Shekasav Aleim Saviv over Aleim Yechezkel Achyosim, that he went over to the people that were Saviv, that were making around the walls of the Mishkan, the base of Mikdash, they were drawing all this graffiti. Those are the people they resurrected. And the Marsha, the Ben Yehuda says, why again? Why were these people worthy that the miracle of the resurrection of death should happen through them? So he says, "V'hatam shechayu." Why did these people come alive? It's a message to Nebuchadnezzar. Ve'ilhars Nebuchadnezzar v'siatit to show Nebuchadnezzar and the people with him. Shafilo Raim Shebisrael Yesh Lam Takana. That they shouldn't think that a lot of people thought, right? A lot of people thought that the Jewish people were deserving of the destruction. They brought it upon themselves, right? People say, there's voices that say October 7th it was brought upon themselves. So the sign was to show Shafila Raim Shebisrael Yesh Lam Takana. There's no such thing. That even the wicked people have a fixing. Like we see these people that even they draw graffiti on the base of Mikdash. Yechezkel brought them back to life. And they're important to God. Every Jew is important to God. And he wanted them to be affected with fear when they saw that even the wicked people amongst Israel, Nebuchadnezzar knew who these people were. He knew what they did. And he sees that they became alive. So therefore he was fearful of the Jewish people. So he says, Rabbi Yochanan says, continue, that Oisam Meisim Hayu Minahar Eshel Adravas Bika Dura. So where were they exactly? This doesn't go according to all the opinions, unless some way or another they washed up over there. But these were people that were in the area of the Bikas Dura. Shebeshasha Igla Nebuchadnezzar Rashes Yisrael, that when Nebuchadnezzar the wicked exiled the Jewish people, Hayu Behem Bachurim. It says like this, that there were some very young boys, meaning to say young, handsome, young adults, Shahayu Meganin Esacham B'Yefyan, that the sun was weak at their beauties. It means they were so attractive obviously not just physically, but also spiritually, that the sun, which gives off light, was dimmed compared to their beauty. V'haya kazdios, and the female kazdios, the female women of Bavel, roinaisam v'shaifei zavas. It had a physical effect on their body from the attraction they had to these young, beautiful boys. Amru lebaleim ubaleim lemelech, and they shared this information, obviously for whatever reasons, with their husbands, that they were attracted to these young boys, these young men, and the husbands obviously didn't like that, so they went and told Nebuchadnezzar, "What are you bringing all these good-looking boys to Bavel? It's disrupting our marriage." So what did the king do? Tziva ha'melech v'hargam. He killed him, right? That's how do you deal with a problem those days? So if the young boys that they brought from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel are disrupting the marriages of the Kazdios, of the women and the men of Bavel, so he killed the boys. But it still didn't affect. They were still very attractive because even in their death, they were thinking of them. So what did he do? Tziva melech v'roimsam. He destroyed them. He basically had them run over, so they should look. The women should see them in their bloodiness, and then they should stop thinking about these boys, and it wouldn't disrupt their marriage. We're obviously dealing with deep rooted issues here. So he says, just look at Rashi. He says, Minar ad sharibais. Okay, he says Betziva melech v'hargim v'dayin shofars. They were flowing with desire for these boys. Rashi says, Betziva hamelech v'hargim v'dayin ha'yishofars. Even after they died, he killed them. Shaynir ziv tayram v'tziva melech. They still imagined them. They still remembered their image. So the husbands were saying it's still disrupting. They don't like that their wives are attracted to these young boys that once came here, even if you killed them. So but and then he went and he had them destroyed. All right, we're going to stop here. The Gemara continues. The Gemara continues about the story. Just some. Oh, okay. So then that Gemara is going to go in from there to Hananim Shal Vazaria. He also has over there. It says, did I miss something? It says. Says somewhere I think it's the next piece of the Gemara. I don't think I missed anything here. So he connects. The Gemara connects the next piece of the time that that Nebuchadnezzar threw the great prophets Hanani, Mishael, Vazari into the fire. That's when Yechezkel resurrected the dead, and he was drinking. The Gemara says he was drinking out of vessels. He made vessels out of the bones of these dead people, and the bones themselves, as he was drinking out of them, became alive and started to hit him, or touch him, like whack him. So obviously these are all interesting stories. We're going to stop here and we're going to continue with Shem next week. I think it's still possible to we can still learn before Sukkot one class. Laila Tov, everyone. Take care and have an easy fast and Gemar Chasima Tova. Thank you for joining.